Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for the invitation. I very much appreciate it and hope that I'm able to make some small contribution. I have to confess that that's a rather old CV and it's now quite a lot longer than 25 years, but I shall pass lightly on. I was asked to talk about preparing for accountability and about key actors, tools, the one-stop shop and managing risk. I want to take a step back. I should just say my slides are actually in the pack, so if you don't want to stay for the presentation, you've got the slides, feel free, you know. This is obviously why people don't put their slides in the hope people will stay. I want actually to take a step back and say something more general about accountability. It is one of those terms that has become incredibly sort of fashionable. You know, it's like accountability is the new black. Everybody's wearing it. But exactly what it means is not clearly defined. And in the regulation, actually, it just sort of slithers in and out a couple of times. It's a bit like, I don't know, those of you who know your T.S. Eliot's cats, it's a bit like McCavity the mystery cat. When you reach the scene of crime, McCavity's not there. And so, although we've all got various lists of things that we say are accountability requirements, they're never quite the same from person to person. All have put a number in accountability. Clearly some things are, but quite what counts as an accountability requirement, I'm not sure. So what I want to do is talk about the key actors in accountability under the regulation, and then just say something about what accountability is in practice. My view is it is a commitment to achieving a common standard of behaviour for which you can show that you have appropriate mechanisms to deliver to those standards, processes to support them, and the people to make them real. And then I want to look particularly at accountability requirements on controllers and processors. But basically my starting point is that accountability is not and should not be limited to controllers and processors. This is what I would put as the basic, the main issues in accountability. Hang on, have I just gone back? What is accountability? So just to say, I've flagged that talking about accountability, as I said, accountability is the new black. It's increasingly adopted by regulators. I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's a term that tends to be used without sometimes a huge amount of analysis as to what it actually consists of. So that's where I want to start, is what do we mean when we talk about accountability? That's where I want to kind of get on to. And I would say that we are saying that we have got a common and agreed set of standards and clear goals that those who are involved in this compliance infrastructure adhere to. And I think you can see from our discussions this morning that we are some way to getting there on that element yet. We have still got a long way to go. We've got ambiguities. We're waiting for guidance. We're waiting for member state law. We need clarity on the responsibility of people. So what are the responsibilities and who actually delivers to these various bits of these standards? We need to be able to see what those people are doing, transparency for the actors, and then demonstrable compliance with those standards to those agreed levels delivered via appropriate processes, people and policies. And then where those fail, where they don't deliver, accountability means you actually are in the end held accountable. There is redress, there are redress and sanctions where people have failed to deliver. But it seems to me that those sanctions and redress apply where accountability has failed. And what we really want to concentrate on is getting to the right position before we need them. I think that what you can see, certainly from my view of this, is that accountability is a shared burden in any environment. When we talk about accountability under the regulation, there has been a tendency to talk about it as though it is only controllers and processors that are going to be accountable, that have any kind of responsibilities. I don't think that that is the case. I think that we have to look at that more broadly. And clearly in different environments, different actors have different levels of responsibility. And I thought that the Microsoft comments this morning about Microsoft in their role of processor was very interesting, because generally we think, oh, controllers are the most accountable. Actually, in those kind of environments, maybe processors have more power and the burden to deliver to the appropriate standards rests more heavily upon those. And I think within the increasingly complex system of processing personal data, there is an increasingly complex network of responsibilities in relation to those who are affected by our processing. So if we look at the regulation, Article 5 refers specifically to it. It simply says the controller shall be responsible for and able to demonstrate compliance, and then it has the word accountability in brackets, which I think is particularly nice. Article 22 then requires that organisations implement appropriate technical and organisational measures to be able to demonstrate their compliance. But as far as I can see, and I'm happy to be corrected, the word accountability only appears once in brackets in Article 5. So I think we need to kind of give it some more flesh. So who are our actors in this new infrastructure that we are going to move into in the next 2 years? It's not just data controllers or processors. I think data subjects are actors, whether you see them as consumers or whether you see them as citizens with rights, and that might just be a matter of terminology. Supervisory authorities have huge responsibilities and will be accountable. The board will have huge responsibilities and be accountable. The Commission will continue to have significant responsibilities and a significant input. And I think the point I'd make is that all of us are responsible within this environment. All of these actors are responsible very often one to another. And when we talk about accountability, we have to talk about the behaviour of all of those parties. And what I would liken accountability to is the sort of creation of an infrastructure. If you are going to have a working city, your roads and your street lights and the rest of, and your public transport and your sewers all have to work more or less together. They all have to, you can't constantly be digging up your roads in order to repair your sewers, because then your roads wouldn't work, and all those kinds of things. And I think that what we need to move to is a kind of infrastructure of compliance and accountability. So what I've done very quickly, and I just want to make this broad point: who is accountable to whom? And I've actually tried to sort of set out. Now, you may well disagree with this. You may well say, well, I don't think they're accountable, so I don't think they're accountable to them. But I do think thinking about, to whom have we got responsibilities? To whom have the different actors got responsibilities? To whom are they answerable? Clearly, controllers, I'm only going to go through a couple of these. Clearly, controllers are responsible to data subjects. They are accountable primarily to data subjects for achieving compliance that delivers the rights of individuals. And that seems to me the primary accountability, not to regulators. I, as a citizen, am not accountable to the police for my everyday actions. I am accountable to my family, to my friends, to my community, to my church, to my work, to those who are affected by my actions. They are accountable to other controllers, those with whom they work, joint controllers, to processors, because their actions can affect all of these people and impact upon them. They are accountable to they have an accountability to their employees, who they must help to train and ensure that they know what they're doing and they are able to safely deal with data, to processors and sub-processors. And right at the bottom I've put regulators, because I'm trying to sort of stress, I suppose, here is this is not some binary relationship between controllers and processors on one hand and regulators on the other. That is not accountability. Accountability is a far broader concept, at least it is in my view. You may disagree, because because I made this up, basically. I haven't sort of taken it from anywhere, I just made it up. Data subjects, I think, have some responsibilities. I think they have some responsibilities to controllers to actually give adequate information, if they give accurate information. And I want to say something about sort of data subjects in a second, but I'll just say that as employees, well, I won't dwell on this. I'll just go through the next couple. Supervisory authorities. Are supervisory authorities accountable creatures in this new environment? I had this dream that occasionally somebody might nod as I said that, but I'll pass on. Is the European Data Protection Board accountable to anybody in this new environment? Go on, nod, it'll make me feel better. Or at least think about nodding, and I'll take it as a kind of sign. I think they are. Clearly, supervisory authorities have got huge responsibilities towards data controllers and processors in the way that they regulate, in the consistency and clarity of their guidance, in the fairness of their actions. The EDPB has an enormous responsibility, and with responsibility, it seems to me, they're accountable. They must be able to be held to account to provide clear, consistent leadership and guidance, and that will take time to supervisory authorities to work with supervisory authorities and to data controllers and processors, and of course always to data subjects. So what I've tried to kind of list these on, and what I'm trying to say is that accountability actually, it seems to me, should be the basis of a mutual and supportive way in which we try and make this regulation work going forward. And doing that, I think we have to look at working together to produce an infrastructure that delivers compliance. And then I've gone on to data processors and the Commission, and you can see that I've tried to kind of continue the pattern of thinking through, well, who actually is affected by the actions of these parties? Who has got responsibilities under this regulation? So if I've got responsibilities, surely I'm accountable. To who am I accountable? Who can my responsibilities affect? How must I ensure that I meet with those? And I have included member states in there. Member states will have wide responsibilities, as we've already seen this morning. There are quite a lot of provisions that are left for member states to deal with, to put into operation, and some degree of discretion as to giving further specific provisions around elements of the regulation. And I put civil society groups, and I actually kind of stopped when I got to this, because I struggled to say that civil society groups have much of a role under the regulation. There is an element of role for consumer representative groups if those are then, if member states designate those groups. But actually, we've got a very active component of our kind of, if I call it our community, and I know people don't think of data protection as a community, but I actually think that increasingly it is, and we ought to kind of think of it in those sort of terms. It is a bit of much of an outlier group, and I'm not sure whether civil society groups would say they should be in some way responsible, and to whom they're responsible and for what, and should they actually kind of regard themselves as outliers whose job is to be activists and to put pressure and to stand outside kind of some other responsibility, or it's a different kind of responsibility. So I kind of left that on one side, and I think I've got a question mark about whether actually sort of pressure groups, activists, campaigners stand outside this kind of area. So if I go then back to the GDPR, there is clear accountability in terms of a legal obligation that is couched in those terms upon controllers and processors. And these are the most specific levels of accountability. But as we look through the regulation, and so I've said, I've set out here, if you go through the regulation and you look for provisions that say this party is responsible for delivering these things, and clearly, therefore, they can affect others. The two that are missing, as I said, civil society groups, consumer groups, really don't have much of a kind of role under the regulation. But the other group that has very little in terms of a kind of responsible role actually are data subjects. And can I just say, I'm still kind of thinking through this. I was asked to talk about accountability, and when I kind of came to look at all the stuff that seems to be written, a lot of which tends to be US-based and is kind of seen, I felt was a little bit us and them. I thought, well, no, you know, let's look at this and try and look at it in a slightly different way. It does seem to me that there is something to think about there. I think we have singularly failed so far, and I include, well, probably we includes people of my age, and you are all a lot younger, really to engage our data subjects. Even over the last 30 years since we've had data protection, we haven't really done it in a successful way. We haven't engendered in people a sense of responsibility about the accuracy of their data, about how they deal with security. And I mean, I hold my hand up here. I have got 2 grown-up children. My daughter was the first data protection baby, as it were, in the UK. I was the first person to take maternity leave from the regulator's office, and she's now grown up. She's an area manager for Aldi. I have not managed to inculcate in her a real sense of responsibility for guarding her own privacy, looking at when she hands data over. She's probably a bit better than some other people because she knows I'd go on at her so much. But we've kind of got this digital generation, and we haven't managed to inculcate, I feel, in them a strong sense of ownership of taking some responsibility for their role in their privacy. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that individuals can go and take on Google or take on Facebook or take on Microsoft, but I do think it points to something that we really need to move into as we move into the new world of the regulation. And it seems to me we have a tremendous opportunity, actually, under the regulation, with the movement towards seals, certifications, codes of practice, that we can try, at least, to move to some bigger engagement of data subjects, of citizens. And this is not, you know, I've worked in this area for 30 years or whatever, so the person I'm criticising most is me. So, you know, so don't come back and say, well, that's ridiculous and you shouldn't be saying that. But I do think that sometimes we have to sort of think some of these things, because we need to think through where we're going forward and how we're going to build this new future. So that was my little frolic, basically, on the question of accountability. And now I'll turn to what I was sort of meant to talk about. Accountability obligations of, so you can go back to sleep now. Accountability obligations of controllers. As I said in opening, it's actually very difficult to decide which of the obligations in the regulation should be counted as, what do we mean by accountability obligations? And I think that if I just go back to this first, there's probably a quick way of doing this. But if you go back to this slide where I tried to set out what do we mean by accountability and what do we mean by the obligations, I think really there are a couple of things where we look at provisions under the regulation and we say, yes, we should regard those as accountability. So the ones that deal with transparency and openness in the actions of the actors, it seems to me, are clearly accountability obligations. And the ones that require demonstrable compliance with standards, policies, processes and people are demonstrably accountability obligations. And when we go through this list, what you'll see is that the vast bulk of these are imposed upon controllers, to a lesser extent processors, but not upon other actors. But I've made that point, I'll stop going on about it. So measures for compliance definitely fall into the policies and processes and procedures. Design and default, I think, falls into the policies, processes and procedures. Avert and clear allocation of responsibility, I think, is in the knowing who the actors are, knowing what our obligations are. Responsibility for processor contracts, again, I think is part of the allocation of responsibility. and records is very much in the transparency element and having proper records of those. It seems to me that the reference codes and seals and certifications, which will be developed under Articles 38 and 39, potentially do give a very strong vehicle for accountability mechanisms that can involve kind of all the actors. So security measures, I think that's an accountability obligation, because you've got the reporting obligations, you've got to keep proper records of your security. The breach notification, I think that's an accountability element to your data subjects as well as to supervisory authorities. Impact assessments prior consultation, I think go without saying, and the data protection officer appointment and specification of the role. Actually, an awful lot of the way that the GDPR works can be classified in terms of accountability and what you have to do to deliver it. So on the practicalities, I don't want to say a huge amount of this because Chris Graham is speaking tomorrow, and he has actually done, the ICO has done a sort of project where they've got a list of this is what you need to put in place, this is where you start, and in effect preparation for the GDPR is preparation for accountability, because that's just the way that it works out. So really it's a question, I think the basic position for any data controller, and more or less the same for a processor, is know what data you have got and where it's going and what you do with it. How those words trip off the tongue. Know what data you've got and what you're doing with it and where it's going, like anybody really completely does. It is actually a very difficult thing to do, and sometimes you can, when you try and find out, sometimes we do audits and of people, and you do this whole audit of this organisation. There are some things I absolutely dread. You go into one bit and you say, well, I understand from so and so and so, so you do this, this and this. Oh, we do? But we've got our own little system here. And your heart sinks. You think, oh, no, there's this lurking, there's this whole sort of mechanism for dealing with debt nobody knows about. And when we do audits, we always go to the IT department last. And we go to the IT department with this big sort of thing saying, this is what they say they do, and this is what they say. And the IT department always look at it and they say, oh, no, we closed that system down 3 years ago. So, the words may trip off the tongue, but actually doing that and knowing what you've got and where it's going is a real challenge. And the other thing I would say, if you're doing the practical stuff internally, try and get your people to look to the future. Now, not like the distant future, but maybe 2 or 3 years down the pike, because that's when the regulation is going to come in. And I could give you an absolute example of this. The UK is at the moment the government is doing a consultation. It's called Better Use of Government Data. It actually means better use of people's data, but, there you go. Anyway, I was responding to this consultation because I'm a nerd, basically. There's a wonderful paragraph in it. This thing is like 30, 40, 50 pages. I can't remember. It was very tedious and very long. And there's one paragraph in it, and it says that Europe has passed this general data protection regulation, which will come into effect probably in 2 years' time. Like, that was it. That was it. We've got this entire consultation about how we're going to have a change in the law, new legislation, we're going to do all these things with data, and I'm reading it thinking, well, do you not think we should say a bit more about this new regulation, just in case there's something in it that's relevant? Now, I mean, that's probably a bit unfair, and I'm sure that somebody sitting in Whitehall is working their way through in a diligent manner. But you know, within businesses and organisations, people will be making all kinds of plans. They'll have all kinds of gleams in their eye. And I think getting into those people early is going to be really, really important. So when we talk about the data flows, joint ventures and all the rest of it, I think it's also looking at the future. And really, it's you know, it's a job, once you know what you've got and what you've got in terms of policies, it's a question of sitting down and working out the difference between the two and where you've got to go, which is fairly mechanistic, but it's the only way that compliance happens. Compliance doesn't happen by inspiration, it happens just by grafting your way through it. And those new processes, it's going to be interesting as to how risk can be built into them and how there are risk assessments. And I think that what people are going to have to do is do a sort of interim assessments, looking at, you know, is it sensitive data, is it going overseas, the obvious risk flags, and then really look what starts to come out of Article 29 and the Supervisory Authorities as they work along. So I'm just going to take another sort of couple of minutes just to talk about the same thing about processors, the accountability obligations of processors. I've flagged not to process other than on instructions, to maintain records, to implement appropriate security, and then we've got notification of breaches of security. They might have to appoint DPAs, they have to enter into contracts with controllers, and they have to cooperate with SAs. As I said before, I think actually the position of processors is in many ways more difficult than the position of controllers, because they not only have a dual accountability, they're accountable under their contracts as well as under the legislation. They are put in a position where they are asked to know a significant amount about the data that they are processing, the purposes for the data they are processing. And one of the provisions, and I can't remember where it is, it might be Article 26, 27, actually says something like that they shouldn't respond to an unlawful request. They mustn't do something if it's an unlawful request. Well, unless it is overtly unlawful, like, I want you to use this data to blackmail, you know, so-and-so, it's going to be very difficult to know whether a request to do particular processing, you know, how are they to know? So, for example, it seems to me processing might be unlawful if proper notice has not been given of the purpose and the nature of the processing. How is the processor to know that? The only way that they're going to know it is by putting a kind of onus upon the controller to give them more information, to satisfy them more. And the processor-controller relationship will, I think, be one of the most interesting ones going forward, because it seems to me that they're going to have to move into a far more both open and kind of cooperative relationship than has always been the case in the past. It seems to me that it's one of the elements that really will change. And in terms of delivering accountability, if you're a processor, really your mechanism is the same. Do you know who you do work for? Do you know what actually happens? Do you know what sub-processors you've got? Do you know what they do for you? Do you know where they are? And do you actually have policies in terms of, do you have policies on retention that you then give to your clients, or do your clients give you policies, or are you in that delightful situation where 27 clients want to give you 27 different policies, and you want to actually amalgamate the processing because it's a lot cheaper? So I think that it's going to be difficult for processors, and delivering those, they will need to do it together with others. So I just want to sum up here about features of the accountability requirements. I would have said that it's extremely welcome, the development of an overt commitment in this law to say we will share an understanding of the standards, we'll know where we're going, we'll know who's doing what, we're going to work on this together, we're going to have transparent policies, and we will have appropriate remedies and redress, and we will deliver to this. But I think that delivering that is going to require the building of a kind of infrastructure, and that all of the actors are going to have to be involved in them in a cooperative way. So what do we need? I think an understanding that everyone has a role, and an element of respect between the actors developed upon shared understanding, shared commitments, and building practical compliance programs. I started off by saying that I've worked in data protection for a very long time. The last 4 years have sometimes been characterised by, because the process we've been through to get to this point with the regulation has been hard and difficult. It has been a long and rocky road. And there has been, you know, I have been to events or, you know, things where basically people are standing there saying, our data protection's better than your data protection. So we want our data protection because our data protection is better than you've got rubbish data protection. Oh no, we've not. Our data protection's far better. It's business friendly. It's this, that, it's. And I'm sorry about that, but that, you know, there has been this kind of, because of the, you know, these have been contentious issues. And I think kind of we've got there now, and we need to, I think accountability really is kind of our vehicle to move ourselves into another kind of arena. And I thought that Bruno's presentation this morning, actually talking about work going forward and trying to kind of build bridges in the future, was very, very helpful, actually. So I am going to finish just a little bit early because I know David is going to talk about privacy impact assessments, and then we've got a discussion session. So I kind of wanted to end with this by saying that I am, I suppose, saying that accountability is a model we should be building, and I would like to put it in a broader context, an approach that I think has something in common with some of the sort of comments coming out of the European Data Protection Supervisor, who was looking at the question of digital ethics and putting it into putting sort of privacy itself and our IT into a broader framework. And I suppose that's really where I'd like to end. Just to say, this is from the EDPS's opinion on towards a new digital ethics. The reform of the regulatory framework will be a good step forward, but we face deeper questions about trends in data-driven society on dignity, individual freedom, the functioning of democracy. I think one of the contributions that we kind of as a community can make is to try to build a robust data protection infrastructure that delivers compliance and that does it for data subjects and that works. And that, I think, is where accountability actually ought to be taking us, accountability to each other and to those who are most affected. So I would like to end there, and I just feel that I ought to say that despite having worked in data protection for nigh on 30 years now, at least you can see I am still an optimist. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.